Let's jump in. First, we'll say hello to everyone. Welcome to Masterclass 3, the third in our series of 4 total masterclasses. This one's entitled Solving the Service Level Objective, or SLO Riddle, Why SLOs Are Not Enough, and maybe also known as Let's Discuss Experience Level Objectives. Thank you very much for giving us some of your precious time today. My name is Leo Vasilou, former DevOps practitioner and author of our annual SRE report. I have the wonderful pleasure of being joined by Brandon today. Brandon, would you mind saying hello to everyone?
Of course. Thanks, Leo. Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Delatte, Senior Solutions Engineer here at Catchpoint. I've been working at Catchpoint for over 10 years now, so obviously definitely looking forward to introducing everyone to a new feature set here that we've introduced to Catchpoint and how that could help everyone moving forward.
Thank you, Brandon. Well met. And before we jump in, just a few housekeeping items. First, I'd like to ask our attendees, please take a second to locate the chat tab. Feel free to make use of it as we go through this session here. Say hello, tell us where you're from, maybe. Second, please make note of the Docs tab. We've placed a couple of resources there for you. And last, please make note of the Q&A or question and answer tab. As we're going through, if you have any questions, need additional clarity, anything that comes to mind, feel free to type them in and we will address them along the way. All right, having said that, all right, Arizona, Colombia, very nice, very nice. Here is the high-level agenda for today's masterclass. So first, we will discuss the nature of the riddle. What is the riddle? We'll go over it, we'll unpack it a little bit, and dare I say, have a little bit of fun. Then we'll briefly cover some key service level terms and concepts. Essentially just to make sure we are all talking about the same thing here. And then last, we'll try to make this transition, augmenting service levels with experience levels. How do we make that transition from talking about service levels to incorporate experience levels? So you might be familiar with the service level indicator. Well, there's this concept of an experience level indicator. Service level objective, there's a concept of an experience level objective. And then we'll talk about some of the reasons to think about this idea of XLOs, experience levels, and the problems that they solve. So Brandon, if you don't mind, you want to take it away?
Yeah, definitely. I'll take it away here. As Leo mentioned, we're gonna start with that riddle. So before we go any further, if you meet me, you might be happy. If you miss me, you might be sad. If you meet me, you might still be sad. What am I? Give it a moment there. Let everyone kind of ponder and think that one over.
Hopefully the title of the masterclass gives everyone a major hint.
Drum roll. All right, drum roll. All right, a service level objective. Now, Leo, what does that riddle exactly mean to you?
So first, Brandon, I think the riddle is brilliant. So kudos to whoever created it. But just to kind of speak to the question and answer, which is essentially the essence of why we decided to talk about this today, is 2 things come to mind. So first, I think what the riddle is trying to say is that IT's inward focus on internal service components and availability is not necessarily a measure of the user's experience, right? Your green and red watermelon colors, I guess, maybe, right? Things look green, but when you dig in, your users Right. Your users might still be having frustrating experiences. And then the other thing it makes me think about is that age-old IT to business communications gap, or maybe sometimes we talk about trying to maintain business agility while preserving application stability, reliability, resilience. And if we just take a second to unpack that, those 2 points a moment. So here at Catchpoint, I am fortunate enough to speak with a lot of reliability practitioners, right? We do our independent research, publish in pieces like our annual SRE, Site Reliability Engineering Report, our Internet Resilience Report. And when we speak with them, they talk about their various approaches to service and application reliability. They monitor their indicators, track them against objectives. The gravity, though, is they usually talk about IT metrics or indicators rather than customer journeys or business metrics or business indicators. And here, kind of going back to the slide about the IT to business communications gap, you could really replace that word developers with any number, IT, DevOps, SREs, PEs, and replace the word user on the right with the quote unquote business. And reporting on those IT metrics or indicators really won't provide the business, or they run the risk of not being able to provide the business with meaningful or actionable insights, right? Speaking completely separate languages, mismatched on what's important or what's valuable. And so if I say that a reliable product or service is critical to business success, I don't think anyone would argue the general essence of that point. But if IT and the business are thinking differently about what that actually means, maybe different metrics, criteria, or perspective, then they will remain disconnected. IT will have a tough time justifying their reliability investments, getting their budgets approved, and ultimately there's a risk of customers, I guess maybe all of us, will suffer. So anyway, Brandon, those are the 2 things that come to mind for me. And I was also thinking maybe before we get too much further, if you could just give us a brief overview of some of the key terms and concepts that we'll be using in this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Let me drill into that then. So we'll make this as quick as possible. We obviously don't want to bore you with some key terms and concepts, and we want to get into the meat of it. So let's move forward here. So what do we mean when we say key terms, right? So what have we spoken about already, right? SLIs, SLOs, and SLAs. Well, when we think about SLIs, at the end of the day, what is this? Think about it as the metric, right? This could be availability. How many times was a customer able to reach a site? How many times was a customer able to check out? Or it could be, a performance metric, right? Was it latency, response time, page load time? We talking about, 1,000 milliseconds. We talking about 4 seconds. At the end of the day, think of SLI, think of the metric. Moving over to SLO, this is, where that metric value should be, right? So, this could be, 3 nines, could be 4, 5, 6 nines, or it could be performance related. It could be, 2,000 milliseconds or within 2,000 milliseconds. This is really what your team is striving to get to when it comes to that specific metric. And then last but not least, the agreement, right? So this is going to be the language, the contract. It's going to be what you're essentially uphold to make sure that your team or your service never breaches a certain threshold that has been obviously set up via that objective. So with that being said, I just want to run through, some quick examples of these 3 key terms. So first and foremost here, what we're looking at is just a simple web test running a Catchpoint, right? We're looking at 2 different metrics here on 2 different time series or scatter plots. And in this case, we're looking at two different service level indicators. So the first one being overall test time. This could be average, could be a percentile. And then we're looking at percentage availability as well. So those would be those two service level indicators for this specific test in this specific use case. Moving forward here over to the objectives, let's introduce two green lines to these charts here. These would be essentially your objectives that you're trying to maintain. So if we're looking at the overall test time, this could be, less than or equal to 100,000 milliseconds, for a user to complete some checkout or some sort of user flow on the page. For availability, you can see this could be, greater than or equal to 3 nines from an overall objective perspective. Now let's go one step further real quick here, and obviously agreement. So this is just a nice fun example of what an agreement could be, right? So we agree to have a journal service availability of those 3 nines between X and Y, Z, and if not, potentially credit 1 month subscription if we're talking about a business to an end user. And then maybe if we're talking business to business or business to vendor, we're talking about some credits for that annual contract term. All right, so hopefully that helps kind of summarize those 3 kind of key concepts and key terms. Now, before we do transition over to XLOs and the XLs for all of those equivalents there, I really think it's a requirement at this point, right, Leo? I think you must go back and watch the previous 2 master classes. And why I say that, I think it's to fully understand and appreciate, why experience levels are needed in today's world when it comes to just digital properties and entities, and really why they're needed to transform, your business and take your organization to the next level when it comes to a maturation perspective. So the first one being here, right, monitoring from your user's perspective. When we're talking about experience, right, all that truly matters is your end user's experience. So in order to get to those XLOs, you're going to have to monitor from your user's perspective. And then going into the second masterclass here that we've touched on, it's all about resiliency, right? I know that's a big term that you hear pretty often nowadays. I just actually heard it on a recent preseason game in the NFL there, talk about being resilient when injuries occur. Well, you also have to be resilient when injuries occur or issues occur to your digital properties. So it's all about ensuring availability, reachability, performance, and reliability across the entire internet stack.
Agreed. 2 things, Brandon. One, so we've got the QR code there on the screen, but also the links to the previous 2 classes are in the Docs tab that we mentioned in the housekeeping at the beginning of the call. And then second, just kind of getting back to what we were talking about here before we make this transition is service levels, indicators, objectives. Those are key reliability concepts. They're critical. They always will be. When you're doing a good job, how much budget you have to do an innovation release, and in no way, shape, or form do we want to detract from their value or their necessity, right? Absolutely critical. All we're saying is that there's room for additional ways to think about them to improve customer experiences, right? So I just kind of want to make that point before we continue any further, because I felt it was important.
Excellent. So now what? Right. So let's now, what is that new concept? I know we said it several times already here that we're going to teach you here in our third masterclass session. So with that being said, I'll hand it over to Leo to kind of take over the next section here as we introduce you to experience levels.
So now that we've covered the foundation, let's talk about how we work it into the conversation. That is, you've got your service levels, or maybe you don't, and you're earlier on your journey. How do you augment them with experience levels? So what I'd like to ask from the audience is maybe clap your hands, do a jumping jack, some type of mental activator to indicate that we're starting a new section. Right, so here on the left, right, a critical transition to thinking XLOs. On the left, you might have your IT, your practitioner saying, let's talk about uptime and response time, latency, or 4 golden signals from Google on those internal IT-focused metrics. But on the right, you have the quote-unquote business, again, the nefarious, the business. They might say, I don't really care per se, right? Obviously they care, but I don't really care per se about the guts of our internals. Instead, I care about how many users can successfully check out and how fast it is for them. So suppose the journey on the right, the user journey on the right, is dependent on the success of all of those services on the left, critical point, which may also include third parties, right? All 4, let's just say for the sake of the conversation, that all 4 of those services have to be successful each and every time for one single user journey to complete. And so suppose one of those single services on the left fails or has an uptime strike, then that user journey on the right also has an uptime strike. That is, the user was not able to complete their journey because one of those 4 critical components failed. So the individual components on the left have their respective indicators. In this case, we're showing availability, and same for on the right. Right, 99.9% or 3 nines is what the availability of that user journey would be if one component failed. Now, continuing, if 2 of those components failed, and then suppose within the given time frame of your objective, in this case, this hypothetical checkout service fails, and this is kind of the critical observation here, is the number of the uptime of individual services is still at worst 3 nines, but the uptime of that journey now has 2 strikes and is at 99.8%. And continuing along, if a third service fails, the indicators of those individual services, again, at worst, 99.9 each, but cumulatively, the availability, the strike rate, or the success rate of that user journey is at 99.7%. And just to kind of close this talk track out, if all 4 of those services failed, they are each individually still at 3 nines, but that journey on the right is at 99.6%. So what we're going to do here is we're going to transition from this idea of uptime and availability to now talk about performance. Performance being a critical part of the transition from SLOs to XLOs, right? The slow is the new down, I guess, is the expression. So same idea. Suppose that journey on the right was dependent on the performance of all of the services on the left. And in this simple hypothetical example, let's just say these services are part of your critical path and load in sequence. And we'll speak more to this in a bit about sequentially versus concurrently. But let's just say if they each take 100 milliseconds, then that means that user journey will take 400 milliseconds. And so 2 of those individual services increase their individual response times by 100 milliseconds each. That's a delta of 2. Can we get a heart on Yi's comment there? Because sees where we're going with this. That's a delta of 200 milliseconds, right? That journey went from 400 milliseconds to 600 milliseconds. And then you probably can guess where we're going with this at this point. Let's say all four of those services on the left, again, critical path load sequentially, increased by 100 milliseconds. Then in that particular scenario, that hypothetical user journey has taken now double the time, right? From 400 milliseconds to 800 milliseconds. Now, let's go back to this slide for a moment. Now that we understand kind of how individual components might impact how we think about the differences between service levels versus experience levels, what could these objectives be? So I want to give an actual example, but I also want to say that your situation in coming up with these objectives is going to be part of a process and communication and conversation with many parts of the business. But keeping with the constraints of the example we just talked through, here's an example uptime objective for your service levels. Individual service components should be available 4/9 of the time. On the right experience level, users should be able to check out 3/9 of the time. And if we do the same thing that we did a moment ago and upgrade and talk about performance, individual service components response times should be less than 100 milliseconds 95% of the time, and users should be able to complete their checkout, right? Experience level, performance should be 400 milliseconds 90% of the time. Now, I said, we wanted to give like an actual example in the context of this webinar, but in the real world, there are a couple of additional things we want to consider here. So first, kind of consider your current state and what the consequences of that current state might be. And then think about, it's like, okay, how do we get from here to there? Or how do we get from our current state to a better, right? Get better at making it better. What would be required to get from here to there? What type of mappings do we have between these internal components and these experiences that people enjoy? Do we even have these mappings? What are the resources to get them? And it's okay if they're not perfect out of the gate, right? Just follow the 3 C's of DevOps: culture, communication, collaboration. And so I think I'll kind of stop there, Brandon. Maybe you can take it away from here, continue for us.
Yeah, definitely. Along the similar talk track of like augmenting your current SLOs with XLOs, before we drill into that, I want to go back to a basic service level graph, right? So look at this graph again. We're talking about availability, and we're talking about server response time, mainly on internal stuff only, right? Is it up or down? How long does it take for just the server to respond? We're not talking about full end-to-end user flow or those critical core web vital metrics. Is it responding potentially just from the cloud or your own data center? Now, if we introduce XLOs, right, this is where we are, potentially going as organizations, or where we are as organizations. These following performance metrics are really key, and that's why we've selected them to track how your end users are actually experiencing your application or server or service from their perspective. So some of these may be new, some of them may not be. They were introduced as the Google Core Web Vital metrics. So things like first contentful paint, right? How long does it take for the browser to render that first piece of content on the page? Moving over to largest contentful paint, well, when's the time the largest content is visible within that browser window? Time to interactive, so this will actually be the time it takes for the page to be responsive to your end user's inputs. And then last but not least, cumulative layout shift. So this would be the measure of the layout and how much of it actually shifts unexpectedly during the page load and as it renders. So these will be kind of those key metrics as we move forward here and kind of show you some more things related to XLOs and the features that we've added to the portal. I think the main thing to point out here, Leo, right, is they account for more than just one single request, as I touched on in the SLO example, how it could just be server response. There are hundreds and, unfortunately, sometimes thousands of requests that are, required to make that FCP, LCP, that interaction for that page. So I think that's something key to point out there as well.
Yeah, and I would also probably remind people of the idea of third parties, but also there's I got a message here in the Q&A. So it's like, so far, so to speak, to the question, the idea of monitoring or measuring your availability performance indicators, but how do we track them, actually track them against objectives? It's one thing to see like the little blips, but how do you actually track to see how you're doing over a period of time? And the question came in a few slides ago, but I waited to address it now. And so if we go to this visual here, this is one of the primary visuals used in tracking whether or not you've met or missed your objectives over a period of time. Excuse me. So it's what we refer to as a burn down chart. Visualizes the trending of whether or not you're on track to meet your objective. And so what we'll say is like, you don't have to necessarily stress about trying to do it yourself or what indicators or what metrics are tracked, right? This is part of, the Catchpoint IPM platform as part of our SLO tracker capability as part of our larger service level management use case. And if you've never seen this before, just kind of give you the conversational way to read it. So on the left, if your actual indicator is above that dotted red line, that means you've met or exceeded your objective. Whereas on the right, if the line is below, the blue line in this case is below that dotted red line, that means you are not meeting your service level objectives. And Brandon, the other thing we didn't really talk too much about, or we didn't really talk. Yeah, no, we mentioned it casually. Is this idea of what they refer to as an error budget? So essentially, the way to think of that is like if you're meeting your service level objectives, then maybe you can use some of your budget to do another incremental release. And, maybe while your cache is clearing or something like that, and you take a performance hit because you got to rewarm your cache or something like that, then as long as you're still exceeding your objective, then you can quote unquote spend that budget on doing things like those additional releases. So you can see that the delta, the white space between the two lines, also visually conveys how much of a budget you have, if you will. So I hope that makes sense. But the main takeaway here is that tracking your indicators against your objectives over a period of time will usually be visualized in what we call this burn down chart. So let me just go back to the comment here. Yep. Okay. Perfect. All right. So I think, Brandon, that's a perfect segue to do a brief demo of how we address some of these challenges and what that looks like in the Catchpoint portal.
Yeah, definitely. Let me go ahead and stop my share and share my screen. All right. Give it a moment to kind of refresh and settle. Excellent. Can everyone see my screen okay?
It does look good on my end, Brandon. Nice full screen. Oh, there we go.
All right, perfect. All right, excellent. Thank you, Shana. Let me go ahead then and start in the portal here with, what you can configure first and foremost to then set, obviously, the SLIs and SLOs against. So what you're looking at my screen here is just a demo account. It's a demo cinema app. So think of just, a movie ticket booking app online. I have a suite of tests set up against this application, spanning from basic DNS reachability to HTTP availability, SSL certificates, network perspective, running a trace inside out 2 tickets, running a trace route to my infrastructure externally, all the way to actually executing a full user transaction through Playwright, for example. So as Leo mentioned, right, it's important for those experience levels and those XLOs is to measure that full end user experience, right? So in this case, it's actually booking a full ticket here for a movie coming out, obviously. So with that being said, you can see several different steps here. So about 4 steps, we're running through 4 different pages of that user flow, and we're running this at a frequency of about 1 location every 5 minutes. So we guarantee to check here every 5 minutes for this Playwright transaction example. Now what I want to do is jump over into the new portion here, and it is going to be living, or it does live within analysis SLOs. So this is just a new module here within the Catchpoint IPM platform, where you can go ahead and first and foremost configure your objectives. So you're going to want to go ahead and click over into that objectives tab. And then from here, you have the ability to set up your SLOs and SLIs. So I do have some set up here for the demo. So some of them are related to availability, some of them related to performance metrics like DNS and test time, and then some of them related to our new XLOs like largest contentful paint, FTP, timed interactive, and CLS. So if I just click into one of these examples here, you have the ability to first and foremost give it a name, specify whether or not you want this an always on, always running objective, or if there is a certain time frame that you'd like to point this objective against. The next configuration would involve that metric that you want to leverage, and then the certain violation thresholds and conditions for obviously that indicator. So in this case, what is your actual objective? I've set it at 2,500 being greater than being a violation for a certain percentage of my nodes over a certain time frame. You could also see you have the ability here to configure your goal. So my goal is to meet this threshold 75% of the time. Now, last but not least here, you're going to go ahead and apply the tests or assign those tests to this specific SLO or XLO. So you just go ahead and drop in your specific Catchpoint monitors, whether it's an API test, a full user experience test, any one of our monitor types there, and then go ahead and click Save. Now, when you click Save, it's going to take, obviously, for the next test iteration within that time frame window to then update your actual status over here on the left-hand side of my screen. If I click back over to the status here, what you'll now see are my running objectives.
So Brandon, I wasn't quite sure when the best time to interrupt your flow was, so forgive me if I.
Oh, feel free. No worries.
A comment and then a question from the Q&A. So I'll kind of take a second to stress that what we did there was we set it on a user journey, right? You could also set it on those internal components and then assign it to a different objective, by the way. And then, you can have your service levels and your experience levels in the same portal. But then this other question here is like when you have the transaction up on the screen, essentially it says, when you're looking at the transaction, sometimes there'll be third parties that are on the page, but that don't affect the user experience. Is there a way to account for that? And so the way I take that question is, I think what they're trying to say is like, do we have some options to specify some configuration so that we're not affected, our objectives aren't affected by third parties that are just, maybe it's just the tracking tag or something like that. So that's how I took that question.
Yeah, and you can do that a number of different ways. I think the best way, and the way that I've seen a lot of our customers doing that, is configuring a additional synthetic test that you can run alongside that your typical scenario, right, where we have all those third-party tracking pixels firing off. And with that, we can actually go ahead and apply what we call request blocks, where you specify specific requests or hosts that you want to block test execution. So I've done that in this case. So in this sense, I've grabbed my 3 third parties. You probably have more than I do. You may have a tag manager that you can block, which would be a lot easier. And in that sense, we're now only loading or requesting, right, those first party objects for my cinema app. And then in that sense, you can then apply the objective to this specific test that you've configured.
Awesome. I think that's what the question was. So thank you for that.
Excellent. No, excellent. All right, let me jump back over here into the SLOs tab. So jump back over to the status. So we have our objectives configured. Again, these could be availability for the internal. It could be more of the experience level objectives with those core web vitals. And then once you jump over to the status tab, this is where you'll go ahead and see, okay, what is the current status of those objectives? So let me reload that. Hang on 1 second. Perfect. So you'll see all those objectives here. Again, we're polling this live, right? So this isn't some, point in time report where you gotta refresh it and so on. This is, as you see, we called this refresh of data from our database live as I refresh that page. And what we're looking at is the specific test that you set objectives against. What are those objectives? What's your goal? And then what is your current state against that goal on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis? All of this is sortable. So you actually have the ability to see, well, where are we seriously exceeding our budgets, and where are we currently meeting our budgets on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis. You could also go back in time here and look at from a week by week basis. You can go back in time, and same thing for the month and the quarterly. So again, this is something that you have the ability to dive into live in the portal, and then also download it as time goes on if you need to share that outside of Catchpoint.
And Bernard, for you looking at the chat there, the question came in.
Yes.
And then essentially what they're saying is, it looks like you're in the portal. Is there API access for this stuff?
I'll have to double check. I believe there is the ability to pull the SLO reports via the API, but I'll have to check to see if we can configure that. That's a good point, Leo. Great.
Excellent.
Perfect. All right. So hopefully that gave you kind of a good idea of how to leverage the new SLO feature, including the XLOs within the Catchpoint portal. So as an existing customer, you can come right into the analysis SLOs tab, get that first objectives or set of objectives configured, apply it to the test, and then you'll see your status update as obviously those tests execute and as time goes on. Great. Any other questions, Leo, before I stop my share?
I don't see any, Brandon.
All right, perfect. Let me stop my share and we can restart.
All right. Okay. All right. So first, thank you for that, Brandon. Appreciate it. And just a quick check on the Q&A. All right, we got all of the Q&A. So, right. So, what's the riddle? Right. If you meet me, you might be happy. You miss me, you might be sad. If you meet me, you might still be sad. What am I? Service level objective. And then talking about augmenting service levels with experience levels. And then, okay, it's like this journey. Should we do it? Right. So I hope nobody from any of the analyst firms are listening right now. But as I mentioned, we do our own independent research here, right? We do these surveys. For example, the SRE survey, we use it to publish the SRE report. And I was reading an analyst report about what they think the trends might be for this year, right, going into next year. And so, put one of the in the form of a question. We asked, what do you think your organization should prioritize to adopt over the next 12 months? So you can see from our reliability survey 2024, 301 responses, or N equals 301. Here is the responses. So obviously just reliability in general, 42% of the people selected that, but service level and or experience level perspectives, very close second at 40%. So we always try to arm people with the data, right? Little nuggets, little conversational items, so that they can go and use to justify their investments, or at least start the conversation. So I thought this was a relevant stat, a bit of a sneak peek at next year's SRE report to help get your conversations going. And so, having said that, let's work to wrap this up. Talk through some recommendations here, right? That transition, that journey. Brandon, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not a master class, right? Unless we give you some sort of nuggets to walk away with and to use in your day-to-day. So the first one here, and we're talking about, again, recommendations for setting these XLOs. Always remember that slow is the new down, right? We can no longer focus on, well, my server's up and available, right? Oh, but how long did it take for that content to be delivered to the end user, right? Was it 100 milliseconds or was it 10 seconds, right? To an end user, depending on what that object is, I might be a little upset and I might be thinking, posting on, X and other social media, hey, XYZ is down, right? So always remember that slow is the new down. Performance is key.
Sorry, Brandon. By the way, I asked as one of this year's, engagement questions, slow is the new down. Have you ever heard this expression before? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? Right? I give people, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but suffice it to say, it's not just something we're making up here at Catchpoint, right? It's been a term that I've heard in hallway conversations for a couple of years now. And I was like, I'm curious, is this more than just a hallway conversation or like some little internal anecdote? And the answer is yes, it is. So I'll take the next one, I guess. Monitor what matters from where your users are. So you've got your application stack, right? Includes third parties to create the experience, but then you also have your internet stack, which is used to deliver those experiences. And those stacks will be different in different parts of the world. And you actually might have to be talking about setting different indicators or objectives in those different parts of the world. And the only way you're going to know whether they're being met or missed is to monitor from where your users are. So again, watch those first two masterclasses where we kind of drill into the nitty gritty of some of those concepts there. But monitor from where your users are.
Excellent. And the next one here, Leo, would be don't consider service levels as your experience levels. Now, I know that's kind of a mouthful, but essentially what we're getting to there is just go beyond your internal availability metrics in logs, right? You need to create a new set of indicators and objectives when we are referring to experience levels. And it's key, right? Again, do not consider what you're measuring internally as your externally experienced levels. I think that's a key one there.
Yeah. No silos, right? Work with the business. So your product owners, your program managers, your go-to-market GTM strategists, your risk managers, to determine customer focus requirements. Identify your critical processes, journeys, right? Your product is going to know what's important to your users. Your GTM strategists, right? These are your salespeople, your sales engineers. They're going to know what's coming in from prospects, what's important to grow revenue. People who manage risk are going to know about how governance and compliance might influence what your objectives might be. We've always got rules and regs here in the States for finance verticals, for example, that stipulate reliability and resilience requirements, right? You go, you're like, pay this bill now. Well, there are rules and regulations that say you need to have resilience programs in place to make sure that that payment actually posts. Or EU, European Union, DORA Act has recently been in my feed a lot, right? Digital Operations and Resilience Act. But please don't set these objectives in silos. And remember the C's, right? DevOps, culture of communication, collaboration, and I'll add one more C, right? Catalyzed by iteration.
No, that's excellent. And going over to the next one here, right? It's key to, I mean, obviously, before you get in any sort of agreement, you must know what your actual baselines are from a user experience perspective externally, right? You can't go into this thinking, all right, I'm going to go ahead and set my objectives for, my overall largest contentful paint to be 1 second, when in reality, your actual baseline is potentially 3 or 4 seconds right now, right? So it's extremely important when setting up these XLOs is to make sure that you do have some sort of baseline expectation or prediction of what your users are currently experiencing today.
And continually optimize. I mean, really, we're getting close to time here. I don't drag it out. All I want to say here is don't analyze to paralyze, iterate, right? Get that white space between your actual indicator and your actual objective, just make it a little better each time. And just remember, it's what is it? It's the journey, not the destination, something like that. But yeah, that infinity loop life cycle, continually optimize. Alrighty, I think we're getting close to wrapping it up. I'll just say thank you for joining today. I don't see any questions in the Q&A tab, but if you have any, please type them in, and we'll go ahead and work to close it out.